Good evening. Just state your name for the record, if you would, and go ahead. Tell us about your property.
Hi there. Yeah, my name is Lauren Marug, 312 East Chandler Drive. We're super excited to apply for the permit on this property. And I think just thank you to the city for bearing with us through the application process. We were very careful to make sure that we met all the marks and followed all the restrictions. And I think that's all I had to share at this time.
Any commissioners have any questions?
Commissioner Wright, this is for the city, Mr. Downing, as our interim CDD. Okay, here's the applicable criteria for 15.445-300. It has to do with the R1 low density zoning in the zoning district, but the applicant is put down as AF10 zoning on their application. So if it's AF10 zoning and this can't fly.
That zoning doesn't exist within the city.
Okay. But there are properties, I've looked at properties here that are AF10. So do we need to put those on any tables?
So James, could you verify? And Commissioner, could you clarify which portion of the application materials or which attachment you might be referring to?
Yes, application page 1 of 60. Current zoning AF10 on the attachment number 1.
So when staff reviewed this, my understanding is that it was determined that the application materials are incorrect and the zoning that was cited in the presentation and in the staff report rather than attachment 1 to the staff report is correct.
Okay. So the low density zoning is correct. All right. Then my second one is actually to the applicant as well as the city, and this is why. I looked up. I understand that your application was originally for 4 bedrooms, but the Yamhill County assessor has 3 bedrooms only. I looked up your floor plan listed with a realtor for new housing, and a new housing will have a floor plan on there. And it actually does have 4 legal bedrooms. So I want to know if the applicant, and if this is copacetic, and I want to know, does the applicant reserve the right to 8-person occupancy upon Yamhill County assessor for a 4-bedroom updated CMAP from a 3-bedroom?
I would say at this time,
This is another reason why I'm commenting about this. We have a lack of workforce housing here. And with a 4-bedroom, it can actually go also to a shared housing status and be a part of workforce housing as well. We had a case come before us that a lady had a shared housing where she actually stayed there and still was able to do that. And I don't know if this is set up for that kind of situation.
Is that question for the applicant or for staff?
Staff.
So staff went on the best available information that we had. So the application stated that there were 4 bedrooms. The assessor data stated that there were only 3 bedrooms. So applicants, when we've gotten into this, and it's been a relatively new occurrence, have the ability to request an inspection from the building department to verify bedrooms, because what is simply stated on a floor plan is not necessarily a conforming bedroom associated with safety standards. This applicant in this case spoke with staff and chose to proceed with a 3-bedroom count that was consistent with the assessor data. But if the applicant wants to explore alternatives and perhaps continue to an alternative date, that's an option that staff's fine with. But it's really at the applicant's discretion how they would like to pursue it. James, do you have anything you'd like to add in addition to that?
No, I think we kind of in the review process check for building permits and certificates of occupancy when there's a discrepancy and then kind of to discuss that with the applicant to see which path they would like to pursue.
All right, thank you, because I would like, I wouldn't want that to be a missed opportunity for workforce housing or any other thing.
Well, and one of the things I would bring up, Commissioner, is that workforce housing would probably indicate there's certainly an advantage to most homeowners having a vacation rental and being able to generate income. So someone that chooses to live on site and do short-term rentals, unquestionably, that's going to be a benefit to them, helps them have general affordability associated with their property. But we don't have any restrictions associated with whether or not someone can rent part of their available kind of bedrooms associated with that versus they must use the whole thing. So choosing to do what we in a prior staff report or two referred to as a home share is perfectly acceptable, but not required.
Okay, that makes more sense. I do believe on the venues themselves, like Airbnb, that they might have some criteria associated with that. Like you can't stay at the house if there are guests there or something like that. So if it's not a part of our criteria, then
It's not a part of our criteria, and I'm sure that how it's occupied varies from platform to platform.
and it is also good to know floor plans versus inspection, and that's an actual option for them. Does it cost anything extra for an inspection?
Yes.
How much?
I don't know. That's the building department. I just don't know the fee schedule off the top of my head. It could be approximately, again, top of my head, approximately $150. So then go out, basically it's a cost recovery associated with staff time.
Okay.
And
That's
I can add,
useful.
we do have our first applicant who's choosing to pursue that path right now, so.
Thank you. No more questions. Oh, sorry. I do have one comment. I'm sorry about, I have to bring this up with the owner and the rest of the commissioners here. And maybe we can put this in some of our criteria at another part for the short-term rentals. I checked our VRBO and they are not accredited by the Better Business Bureau. In fact, they have a alert and investigation on them, and they have a lot of underlying issues and disputes, and have only a 1.4 rating. And I would be most likely to not vote for something who uses this company. Thank you.
If there are no other questions at this time, is there anyone on Zoom that requested to comment?
No.
Okay.
All right, one more. Sorry, Jeff.
Oh, go ahead.
There was a public submission entered that there is an ADA ramp in front of that house, and if they were to have more than 2 cars, is there any parking on that street?
The parking, so the only requirements they're required to meet are off-street parking requirements. Any on-street parking is public parking, no matter where it falls on the street, regardless of whether it's in front of this house or another one.
So if a ramp is like in the middle of the sidewalk, in the middle of the street, and somebody blocks it,
I don't know that particular ramp, but maybe our
I'm
engineer
wondering
is somewhat
about
familiar
any
with it.
ramps that are in city sidewalks like that.
So there's parking restrictions at near fire hydrants, ADA ramps, all of those kind of things. So that can occur at any time. Somebody could violate the parking requirements and things. So that's kind of an enforcement element and a call to the PD, non-emergency dispatch to kind of make that complaint, and or code compliance might be involved with that as well potentially. But that's what the
Yeah, I didn't even notice the ramp there. Had the person not put a picture in, and I didn't even know there were ramps being put in the middle of the blocks. I'm used to them being on the ends of the blocks for walking traffic like that. Great. Thank you. Now I have no more questions.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and close the public testimony portion of the hearing and ask for final comments from staff and recommendation.
Staff's recommendation is, would still be to move to adopt planning commission order 2023-25 with conditions approving the conditional use permit CUP 230017 for a vacation rental home at 312 East Chandler Drive, Yamhill County, tax lot R 3207 AC 04500.
Thank you. And now we'll go to any planning commission deliberation or discussion points. Any further?
Can we even legally ask people? Are we even allowed to, and this is another question I have, are we even allowed to ask people not to use a certain service because of their ratings?
It would be completely unrelated to any of the criteria that we have at this time. So I don't think that we particularly could.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is Linda Newton Curtis, as usual, pointing to livability, which is specifically stated by 2 local residents. And once again, I think we have to take this into consideration, that they say it will impact their livability, and they actually mention a couple of instances in which it's doing that already. And so I'd just like to bring that to the attention of the other commissioners.
Commissioner Wright, can you point out which letters you feel state this?
Okay, so that means I'm gonna have to read through them again, Chris. If you look through the memorandum, the CUP 23-0017, the supplemental packet material. And if you read through there, and my apologies because I should have highlighted those problems. I guess one of the things that stuck in my mind was that whoever owns the property has left the area and is not contactable at this point. And so the local residents, not only did they not mention their plans around this prior to leaving for Arizona, but they haven't been able to be contacted so that the local residents can discuss the concerns that they have. So right now, this property has been vacant for some time. It's concerning. There were a couple of people here who stated that they were aged over 70, I believe they mentioned, and that it would impact their ability to have a stable neighborhood. And so if they had, let's say, medical issues or some other issues that they needed to get help from the local residents for, it would impact their livability in that regard. And that was the reason they'd actually moved to this area, so that they could have a stable neighborhood. Those are 2 of the things that's just stick in my brain without having to read through all the letters.
Commissioner Wright, as we've talked before about livability, and as our previous CDD has commented that that word livability is very subjective. Even the city has tried to reach out in surveys and other things, and what is livability to one group at one point in time is a different set of livability issues to other groups at the same time and at different times in the future. So I really thank you, John, for bringing this up, and I really thank the person that was here today for bringing that up in public comments about livability. And this is something that we are going to have to hopefully address in the future, and is actually being addressed at this time. We're going to try and come up with criteria for that.
So commissioners, if I could jump in for a moment. So one of the things I wanted to mention is you are not stuck just approving or denying. Those are not the only two options available to you. So there's an entire list of conditions, which is the whole conditional use permit item. So not only did Commissioner Curtis bring up Commissioner Newton Curtis bring up the issue of livability, which is broad and subjective, which we've said to this commission before, but some issues that were expressed concerns of the individual that are associated with how they perceive livability. So the inability to contact their neighbor, for example. One of the things that comes to mind, and this commission has passed and approved of a few permits that are still labeled as the local contact with to be determined. This is one of those. So if you wanted to have a condition where they had to get that sorted out before activating or effectuating, that would be a sort of condition to resolve a problem that's being observed in this particular public comment. But to the point that Mr. Suppy made earlier tonight, it is important that we have criteria. It just happens to be that the conditional use permit criteria are very broad and tend to be highly subjective. But when you do have problems that are brought up that are relatively specific and not excessively speculative, but fairly specific about concerns with contacting someone or what have you, then looking at those conditions that we see, and I'm looking specifically at the municipal code section 15.225.080, which is just a good refresher for folks to remain aware of. If there's an interest, I'm happy to read it aloud for both the commissioner and anyone that's listening, if desired.
Yeah, I would like that, please.
Figure it's a giant reference document. I don't need everyone to chase it down. So the hearing body shall designate conditions in connection with conditional use permit deemed necessary to secure the purpose of this chapter and the general conditional use permit criteria and require the guarantees and evidence that such conditions will be complied with. Such conditions may include, and this goes in A through N list, regulation of uses, special yards, spaces, fences and walls, surfacing of parking areas to city specifications, street dedications and improvements or bonds, regulation of points of vehicular ingress and egress, regulation of signs, landscaping and maintenance of landscaping, maintenance of the grounds, regulation of noise, vibration, odors, and other similar nuisances, regulation of time for certain activities, time period within which the proposed use shall be developed, duration of use, such other conditions as will make possible the development of the city in an orderly and efficient manner in conformity with the Newberg Comprehensive Plan and the Newberg Development Code. So it's a long list. So that's to say that the whole point of a conditional use permit criteria is that your body has the ability to remedy things when you identify a problem. So it's not just yes or no. It could be a yes and something.
Yeah, I thank you for that. That's very helpful.
Is anybody trying to address the livability definition? Because it does provide for such a wide subjectivity. I noticed in one of the letters, an individual states that in the short time that they've lived in that neighborhood for a little over a year, it's the fourth house within 500 feet that has requested permission to be a short-term rental. So I know that this topic has been discussed ad nauseum, but at some point, the subject of livability does come into play.
So I would say that that's one I would consider as part of a future list that staff would like to consider revising or defining or doing something with. Livability, because it's part of the conditional use permits, applies to lots of different project types. It just so happens that over the last 12 months or so, it's come up here in this particular context the most often because we've had so many of these.
Yeah, and just to kind of add on to that, I feel that I have to be a squeaky wheel, and so I will continue to do that.
And
Commissioner
this
Wright?
doesn't apply necessarily to just this particular applicant. And I know that the state has guidelines about what a short-term rental can be in a residential. But it's sort of an oxymoron because if you look at the definition of residential and issues in other communities, you've removed it as a residence the minute you made it a business. You could have a short-term rental. I know we've had applicants that they were going to rent out a room or something. But when you vacate the residence and its only function is income on a short-term basis, to me, that's a business. So, again, we're not gonna resolve any of that here,
But
but
Commissioner Griffith, we also issue home occupational permits, so that's still a business too. I did want to say something about the testimony letters. Whoever out there is listening, I thank you in your public testimony submission in using open language. And what I mean about this is things like potential outcomes, pose a threat, risk of, prioritize safety versus language of unacceptable, won't be accepted in our neighborhood. This type of language makes me concerned about safety if this was to pass in the future too, with that language. And I hope all of those residents, every residence that has come to Newberg is a newcomer. And just because people rent these places doesn't mean they're always partiers. As our police department has shown us, later on this evening, we'll be addressing, as well as the short-term rental ad hoc committee. And that was, will there be any more meetings for that?
There is one additional meeting that's currently on scheduled. I don't think it's on the city's calendar yet, but it's scheduled for the middle of January. Do you remember the date? For January 17th.
Okay, and then I will have another thing to add when it comes to commissioner input at the very end of the meeting. To do with that, Mike. Thank you.
Okay, I just have one little point of clarification I want to ask for Linda, Commissioner Newton Curtis, if we would. You spoke about the resident that was concerned because they couldn't contact someone, that you said they were elderly and were concerned that they, like in an emergency situation, they couldn't contact someone for what? That's what
I imagine an emergency medical situation, help with, I don't know, a leaking tap, who knows? I think sometimes when you're older, it's nice to have a neighbor that you can reach out to for support. And actually, when you're younger too. Sorry,
Yeah,
I'm sounding irritated. I apologize.
I get, and I was thinking that was where we were going, but I don't see how the commission is under any obligation to dictate who a neighbor could be. Well, that's a nice sentiment. They could just as easily get a neighbor that won't answer the door when they talk, that live there all the time. And that's, I mean, we've already kind of go in circles on some of these conditional use permits. And we either need to basically decide if we're going to have them and keep them or not. Because I mean, we see some of the same criteria come up time after time: traffic, this, that, or the other. The one I hold is most legitimate is how it impacts livability as far as home. Geez, I lost my train of thought. But livability as far as the housing market is concerned, it takes good houses off the market that could be used for, you know, more permanent things like that. And like recently, New York City banned vacation rentals in all 5 boroughs, but it's the cost of living they're using as a reason to do it, which I see as a far more valid reason than just ham-handedly saying parking or something, or traffic or something like that, when, let's be honest, how much traffic does extra is generated. So we should like, instead of kind of going in circles on some of these things we can't define, maybe look at issues that we really could restrict them on, because we are getting a lot of them. But and they do have an impact on available rental properties for families moving in, for homeowners, things like that. And if every meeting we're approving two or three, those are 2 or 3 homes that are coming off the market. And on the one end, you don't want to necessarily impede upon the rights of the homeowner, but there has to be a point where we have to say, okay, we need to look at the entire city as a whole and how it impacts things. And instead of looking at how one particular neighbor is they're impacted by each unit, you know what I mean? And get more of a cohesive approach where we say, either we're gonna have them like carte blanche, basically like we do now, or say enough is enough and shut them down, or at least, like you talked about, like distance restriction. And that's kind of, that'll be good when we see our, our committee and our approvals or things go down the line where we get something actually actionable on it.
I understand what you're saying, but I still think it's my duty as a representative of the community to make my thoughts known and put them out for the public record.
I absolutely agree. Thank you.
I would agree that some things that, oh, sorry, Commissioner Wright. Some of these letters going to things, and there's no guarantee a property owner has a month-to-month lease versus a 1-year rental lease. It's no guarantee that somebody can fulfill their year lease and will have to break it. There's all sorts of reasons for month-to-month leases. And I understand that people want to get to know their neighbors and definitely know who they're around. But that's not always a 100% possibility, just to do with variables. That's all.
Okay, any other comments or? Okay, can we go to a resolution? Anyone want to make a motion?
Planning Commissioner Wright moves to approve Planning Commission Order 2023-25 approving conditional use permit CUP 23-0017 for a vacation rental home at 312 East Chandler Drive, Newberg, Oregon.
Commissioner Quinn seconds.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. You get a roll call vote, please.
Jeff Musall,
Yes.
Chris Wright,
Yes.
Lainey Quinn,
Yes.
Mike Griffiths,
No.
Linda Newton Curtis,
No.
Avery Hansen.
No.
That is 3 yes and 3 no's.
The motion does not pass.
The motion does not pass. And I'll defer to staff with a question on what goes with what the next step.
So there's a few alternatives that you can choose. So if someone would just like to flip the coin over and try it again, but say motion to deny the application, you could see if that passes. Alternatively, you could also try amending the motion or discussing and deliberating amongst yourselves what you think could be done to this conditional use permit to make it something that could pass amongst your commission, if you choose to.
Thank you. Did you want to offer?
Planning Commissioner Wright to deny CUP 23-007 conditional use permit.
Commissioner Newton Curtis, I second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Roll call vote on that, please.
Jeff Musall,
No.
Chris Wright,
No.
Laney Quinn,
No.
Mike Griffiths,
Sorry, I need a clarification. The motion was to disapprove it. So if you say no, you're saying you approve it. So we're just doing this backwards. Is that what? I was to make sure what I say.
That's correct. I didn't know if there would be a different outcome. That's just the other way of
Oh.
proposing the motion that you can motion to approve, motion to deny. Those are two basic ways. So that was,
Then I would say, yes, that I vote to deny the application.
Linda Newton Curtis,
I also vote to deny the application.
Avery Hansen.
I also vote to deny.
Okay, so we remain with that one not
Okay.
passing as well. So let's go to.
Commissioners need to deliberate.
Yeah, let's go to discussions to see if we can offer a
Is
solution.
there anything in here that you guys would be willing to allow it?
I thought we already deliberated it.
Well, we did talk about, but now as Mr. Downing has pointed out to us, we can have a third option of deliberating it with conditions. If it is approved.
well, and to put it out there, it's to deliberate amongst yourselves or continue deliberation how you choose. So should you choose to try and encourage your fellows to come over to your way of thinking or explain. And I think, again, I would say Mr. Suppi had a good recommendation. We talked a little bit about criteria associated with, let's see, 15225.010A, which is, or no, not A. Am I looking at the wrong one? The 15225.060A, which mentions livability amongst other characteristics. So what I heard in prior conversation was that livability issue is still something. So based on the public comments that gave the most concern to this body, I would recommend you talk about which things might be solvable that could make it so this could deal with those, or for those that think this merits denial, why this merits denial. What can't be resolved then should therefore be denied. And I would recommend kind of speaking to the criteria where you think you need to, because that's where we have a point where everyone's kind of looking at the same things.
Yeah, understood. So what I'll ask of commissioners that are against it to give us something that refers to criteria as to why, and then we can go from there.
As a commissioner in approval, Commissioner Quinn, was there something from those who denied it that, is there a single point of order from the criteria that you disagree with that we can cite?
Are we required to do that?
Absolutely not. You're not required to
Okay.
as part of your deliberation. But in terms of deliberation, what I heard initially was talking about livability, which is specifically mentioned in that one criteria. And then a citation of some of the items that were brought up by members of the public. And so to me, for your general discussion, if you choose to continue, that seems like a place where could
The
be discussed.
applicant has their hand up to make a comment.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Hi there, thank you. I was just curious, will I get a couple of moments to speak in response to the public comments that were read?
Yeah, give me one moment. What I'll have to actually do is open up the public comment section again.
Okay.
So I'll go ahead and open up comments and now
Thank
you can
you.
go ahead.
You ready for me now?
Yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to call attention to the fact that we actually have friends and family living in the neighborhood and on the street where this home is. And I they're keeping an eye on it for us. And we have not received any phone calls about anything happening at the property from anyone. So I'm just a little bit concerned that someone is saying that they're having trouble contacting us when I actually haven't received any contact attempts.
Planning Commissioner Wright, do your neighbors have your phone number? And did you
Some
leave
do.
any way to contact you?
Some do, and we also have family that lives on the street that has my contact information, and we followed the city's protocol for sending out the letter with the information that was required as well.
And that's what I was wondering if on that notice, they stated they didn't know till they saw the sign out in the yard, one of the letters. And that should have a contact number on it, should it not?
It typically
Yes.
refers people to the city's contact information, and that mailer notice typically has the contact information.
Thank you. So in all realities, maybe they might have missed it and it fell through the cracks. But as far as I know, when a sign is posted, there is a rabbit trail, so to speak, on finding out how to contact that homeowner. In my opinion.
I think it speaks to the livability issue that there are so many in such a short area. We've already agreed that livability is a very subjective term, and I would not change my vote. I do not support it.
Well, I do have one concern that it's by a school, but we also have no written criteria for that. So I cannot use that arbitrarily just as an opinion. It must be in our criteria. Jeff?
Yeah, and that's what I was gonna bring up. If we can't get specific criteria, what we're voting against, it would be, I mean, it's an easy review and override, you know, if the person wanted to do that. So if we're going to disallow it, we do need to establish a criteria as to why.
I see a city person shaking their head back there. Did you want to offer any information? Okay. Thank you. All right, thank you.
So I'd like clarification because I've heard two different things. Are we required to cite why we are saying no?
You're not required to cite why you're saying no.
Okay.
However, if you choose to make a decision that's not based on the city's criteria, it is vulnerable to being overturned. And obviously, someone chooses to appeal, it can go to the city council. But then in Oregon, there's the ability to take it to LUBA should people choose to. And so that's where that vulnerability really comes into play.
Could you explain that last part? Take it to where, I'm sorry?
If you recall, most of the quasi judicial items that we bring forward, there's an announcement which Avery very thankfully reads into the record. And LUBA, or the Land Use Board of Appeals, will look at those against our criteria, whether that's comprehensive plan, whether that's municipal code, and those sorts of things. And if we have not followed our own code as a city, it can be remanded back to us, and they will essentially tell us we got it wrong. So that's what can happen. We become vulnerable to those sorts of remands and similar decisions.
And that's kind of what I was getting at, that if we want to be against these, that we should choose our hill, because it might hurt the case to be against them in the future if we come off as easily, you know, overturned. So I'd ask that those opposed try to state a criteria so we can establish a basis.
So I would go back to the livability and cite that specific requirement.
May I read a letter from the police department that is actually going to come up later on this evening?
Really quick, we still have the public testimony open.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, so thank you for your comment. I'll go ahead and close public testimony and we'll move back over to deliberation. Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna read into the record. Newberg Planning Commission had a short-term rental calls for service. This is a submission from the Newberg Dundee Police Department. Upon this board asking about some of this information. Recently, Planning Commissioner Clay Downing informed me of your request for information on nuisance calls and calls for service in general. That the police department and or code enforcement responded to related to short-term rentals. Mr. Downing provided me with a list of 73 short-term rentals registered in the city, and I asked that I investigate calls for service at those addresses and provide data or identify any trends that may be apparent. Accessing all calls for service for the city in both police department and code compliance department files for the past 12 months, only 8 of the 73 properties listed generated any calls for service. A total of 14 calls for service were received involving those 8 properties, and 2 calls for service were confirmed as not being rental related. The 14 calls were comprised of 1 parking complaint, 1 junk complaint, 1 barking dog complaint, 1 dog at large complaint, 2 noise complaints, 6 behavioral health incidents, 1 information complaint, and 1 harassment complaint. Behavioral health incidents are calls for services that often involve a person in a mental health crisis because of an existing mental health condition or because of behavior altering drugs or a combination of both. In short, a BHI incident involves a person causing concern to the public over behavior that is generally considered to be outside socially acceptable norms. These calls are often reported over concerns the person may cause harm to themselves or others. Information complaints are calls that are generally do not require an officer response or are informational purposes only regarding a situation, planned activity, or incident the caller may or may not know is permitted. Harassment complaints generally include unwanted physical, verbal, telephonic, or online contact between individuals. Of the total calls, now here it goes, of the total calls related to these properties, 6 calls for service involved a single property. 5 of those calls were self-initiated by the property owner, primarily as information on a behavioral health issue of the property owner. Of those calls was for information only. The 6th call was a noise complaint related to the same BHI behavioral health incident. 2 calls for service involved a single property, 1 parking complaint, the other verbal harassment complaint made by the owner and not rental related. The remaining 6 calls for service related to the 6 other individual properties and were comprised of 1 barking dog and 1 dog in large at large, a noise complaint, 1 report of junk left behind, and 2 BHIs, behavioral health incidents, 1 of which was called in by a rental tenant regarding an incident that occurred across the street from her location and was not rental related. So you actually have the opposite here, a person noticing something at one of these places and actually calls the police. So they're not the problem, but they identify one. I found no, here's the last paragraph, I found no discernible trends based on these few incidents recorded. In perspective, the police and code compliance department respond to roughly 26,000 to 27,000 calls for service each year. The rental related calls generated from these specific addresses comprised less than half of 1% of those calls. Similarly, the 73 registered short-term rentals within the city concurrently represented less than 1% of the 9,177 households estimated within our city. And seeing this, I'm very happy that Eric Ronning, the administrative sergeant for the code compliance supervisor, submitted this in another area of, anyway, short-term rental ad hoc committee. So that actually does have to do with some of these processes and what I do have to say about some of these letters, I understand the language potential pose, but some of these are assuming and fear-based, but with some of this criteria and tangible data from the police department, we're finding out maybe some of our horrible scenarios in our head just really aren't there as much as we may think they might be.
I appreciate
that
the
help?
report from the police, but livability is a much broader term than police response, safety. As was mentioned earlier, as the volume of these increase, it affects the livability in the community itself because we're taking potential long-term rentals or housing purchases off the market to be used as a business. So I agree that that's somewhat reassuring on one level from the police department, but unfortunately it just describes one aspect
One
of
facet.
livability.
But I'd like to add that the livability part you're talking about with the overall price of housing and things like that is a citywide issue, not an individual application issue. Anyone else? So, Clay, if I could, if we remain deadlocked, do we need a vote one way or the other this evening, or can we continue?
I was just about to review your city of, the planning commission guidelines and see what those have to say. Since I've been here, this hasn't come up in this way. If you would like to either continue speaking amongst yourselves or perhaps take a short recess, we'd be happy to look into this as you would prefer.
My vote would be for a recess.
Yeah, let's go for a 10-minute recess and we'll convene again at 8:16. Okay.
There's cookies, so help yourself.
Like everybody's back, so we'll go ahead and reopen the hearing. And did you find out anything nice and rich for us there, Clay?
So the planning commission guidelines themselves do not have anything specific about what occurs in the case of a deadlock. And I'm still looking at the city council guidelines to see if that gives us any other city standards to go with. But one thing that's relatively clear is, one, if a vote occurs, and I'm happy to read the planning commission guidelines out loud so everyone can be on the same page. But any commissioners that are present are required to vote or abstain. And then if you abstain, you have to declare why you are choosing to do so. And without a majority, which it will not be approved. So by default, it would remain unapproved if you choose to close this agenda item or even to table it. It would not become approved until there's a majority available to do such an action.
Can it be tabled till January?
Yeah.
Till we have another commissioner?
Yes?
Could it also be tabled until the ad hoc committee has finished their work?
There-
I'd be happy to revisit it once we have additional guidance from the ad hoc committee.
The item could be tabled until January, although there is, I would ask that James have a look at the clock because we have our 120-day rule. And so, and then if we get close to that item, then we might ask the applicant if they would be willing to grant an extension, which is voluntary.
And also for that ad hoc, the criteria would be when
If you would like to say that, you're welcome to.
if you waited until the ad hoc committee finished, the criteria would be what they applied under, not any new.
Well, and wouldn't the applicant, if they don't agree to an extension, they have to appeal to the city council before that window, or how does that?
So there's a 120-day shot clock associated with land use decisions in Oregon. And so the city is required to give a decision. Your planning commission is part of that. If you can't come to a conclusion and it gets tabled, we essentially don't have a final decision. So we would need your commission to figure out if it's going to go forward in some form unapproved. Typically, that happens in a motion. I frankly have never seen a planning commission that didn't have a motion come out of it in some way, although it's certainly possible that you have a situation like this where you just end up deadlocked with no decision. And at that point, if the planning commission asked us to take it forward, for example, to the city council in lieu of the planning commission decision, I suppose that we could do that. If you would choose to, if the planning commission does not want to make a decision on this, that would be unusual, but I don't think that you are precluded from doing it.
But in the absence of a majority, there is a decision. It's not approved. It doesn't stay in limbo.
You haven't issued a decision, you have not made a decision. Those are not the same things.
Come again?
It's just still open. There is no decision that's been issued one way or another. It hasn't been denied, it hasn't been approved. It's simply at this point, it's in a state of not being approved yet. But I would argue that is not a final decision. And I think that's an opportunity the applicant would have available to them if they chose to interpret it that way.
Planning Commissioner Wright, I move to floor CUP 23-0017 to the January meeting 2024.
Commissioner, do you mind if I have us check on what our shot clock is? Would that be acceptable?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And we'd have to run that by the applicant as well, right?
The planning commission can choose to table it without the applicant's permission, but the extension would be at their voluntary.
Gotcha.
If
discretion.
we didn't have an extension, would the planning commissioners agree to meet even by Zoom on the second Thursday? Or this is the first, yeah, we could meet in another 2 weeks. If we want to,
Would the purpose of the meeting simply be that we have the potential to break a tie?
or look at our criteria a little bit more closely and go through each one, but I think we should wait till the January.
So the 120-day shot clock for all local appeals to be completed is February 28th. And that includes a possible city council.
So we have a motion to table to January. Is there a second?
Yes, I second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to table this decision until our January, and I'm sorry, Clay, what date is it? Will it be?
It's the 11th.
To the January 11th, 2024 meeting of the Newberg Planning Commission, which will be held at the same location at 7 p.m. on that date. Hearing is closed.
Do you need to take a vote?
Hearing is not closed. My apologies. We need to vote on that. Can I get a roll call vote, please?
Lainey Quinn,
Yes.
Lainey,
Yes.
Jeff Musall,
Yes.
Chris Wright,
Yes,
Linda Newton Curtis,
Yes.
Mike Griffiths,
Yes.
Avery Hansen.
Yes.
Thank you all very much. The motion is approved, and now the hearing is tabled until the January 11th, 2024 meeting of the Newberg Planning Commission to be held at 7 p.m. in this building, and I'll go ahead and close it now. Thank you. All right, moving on, we're going to jump ahead a little bit, and we're going to look at CUP 23-0015, MIMD 323-002, a conditional use permit and minor modification of Crestview Green Plan Unit Development 4813 and 4821 East Portland Road. So I'd like at this time to ask for any ex parte contact, any bias, or any conflicts from anyone? Hearing none, if Avery, if you'd go ahead and read the language.
ORS 197.797 requires certain statements be made at the commencement of a public hearing. The applicable city and state zoning criteria must be listed. This means that we must advise you of the standards that must be satisfied by the applicant prior to our approval or denial of an application. The planning staff will list the applicable criteria during his or her presentation of the staff report. Persons wishing to participate in this hearing must direct their testimony or the evidence towards the criteria which stated by the planner or other specific city or state criteria which you believe apply. You must tell us why the testimony or evidence relates to the criteria. Any issue which might be raised in an appeal of this case to the Land Use Board of Appeals, LUBA, must be raised in person or by letter at the local level prior to the city approving or denying the application. The law states that the issue must be raised in enough detail to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond. This part of the law is known as the raise it or waive it requirement. If you do not bring it up now, you can't bring it up at LUBA. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions of approval in enough detail to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Prior to the conclusion of the initial evidentiary hearing on an application, any participant might request an opportunity to present additional evidence or testimony regarding the application. The Planning Commission will grant such a request through a continuance or extension of the record.
Thank you. Let's go over to staff report.
Good evening, Commission. I'm Leanne Wagner, one of the other assistant planners for the city. And tonight I will be presenting the case for a conditional use permit and minor modification at 4813 and 4821 East Portland Road. This is in relation to the CUP 22-0001 and PUD 22-0001 case from last year for Crestview Green that I will touch on a bit more in the presentation. I enter the staff report for CUP 23-0015/MIMD 323-0002 into the record. The owner for this request is Bruce and Valerie Thomas, represented by Mercedes Serra at 3J Consulting. Their main request is to allow for a change in the proposed construction timeline, and that is what the minor modification portion of the application is for. The conditional use permit portion of the application is in relation to their previous CUP application expiring. So they are reapplying with the exact proposal as previously approved, just modifying the construction timeframe. The zoning for this area is R1, R2, and C2, and the applicable code portion for review of their request can be found in sections 15.225, 15.220.060, and 15.240 of the Newberg Municipal Code. Next, I'll touch on the land use action background for the site. The two lots were brought into the urban growth boundary in January of 2007, and then were annexed into the city limits in 2008. Oops, looks like, oh, that was that slide. My apologies. The next slide, in May of 22, a lot line adjustment was approved to move the lot lines so that the stream corridor present on the northeast corner of the site would be a part of lot R3216AA01600. And importantly, for the present application, the proposed Crestview Green Plan Unit Development, PUD 22-0001, was approved by the Newberg Planning Commission on June 9th of 22 as order number 2022-06. The original approval included a 111 lot, single family townhouse and apartment development with a total of 133 residential units. Conditions of approval were attached to the decision, and those conditions were included in your packet for reference. For context, this slide is an aerial image of the lot showing their frontage onto East Portland Road to the south and Northeast Benjamin Road to the east. Next, we can see from the zoning map the designations across the site. C2, our general commercial designation, dominates the southern portion of the site, while R1 and R2 are low and medium density zones occupy the northern portion. Looking at the criteria under which to assess the request by the applicant, we find the code sections mentioned previously. Initially, we'll look at the CUP criteria since the applicant's previous CUP has expired. From section 15.225.060A, we are looking at compatibility with the immediate surroundings, and as the proposed application is only modifying the proposed construction timeline by 1 year and is not proposing any changes to the development as it was previously approved, the modification will not affect the location, size, and operating characteristics associated with the planned unit development. Similarly, with criterion 15.225.060B, we are looking to promoting a functional and convenient living, working, and shopping environment. And as the applicant is not proposing any changes to the development as it was previously approved, the proposed project will create that environment. Next, we look to section 15.225.060C to ensure that the application is consistent with all relevant code sections. And from the completeness of their materials being consistent with the previously approved CUP and PUD case, and the addition of their minor modification of the phasing, the applicant has met this requirement. And looking to the CUP code section 15.225.080 relating to conditions, the applicant acknowledges that they will need to adhere to all previous conditions from CUP 22-001 and PUD 22-001 as required by the code and hearing body, in addition to those for the present application. And also similarly regarding code section 15.225.090, the applicant acknowledges that they must carry out construction, site development, and landscaping in accord with the plans, drawings, conditions, and other documents as previously approved for the CUP 22-0001 and PUD 22-0001. And finally, for the CUP portion of the application, we look to code section 15.225.100 regarding expiration of decision, which is 1 year. As the applicant's previous CUP has expired prior to execution, we are deciding on the present application, which will be held to the same standard. The applicant acknowledges that they will be required to commence construction within 1 year of a favorable decision on their present application in keeping with the updated phasing plan and narrative description. Did it happen? It's kind of stuck. Phase magic, okay. Now moving to the minor modification portion of the application, which applies to the previously approved PUD, we look to code section 15.220.060E. Overall, this portion of the code provides for modifications to previously approved developments that are within a 5% change of the previous proposal and do not significantly alter impacts on the surrounding properties. The applicant acknowledges this requirement and has put forth the following construction timeline, which shifts initiation by 1 year from the previous PUD. Okay. There we are. So phase 1 construction begins in 2024, which will include the construction of lots 1 through 7 and 16 through 71, including frontage improvements, utility services, and the pump station. Access via extension to existing streets, private streets A and B, and the fire turnaround for the site will be constructed. And phase 2 will begin in 2025, which will include the construction of lots 8 through 14 and 72 through 111. Right-of-way improvements will include the extension of East Willackenzie and East Jory Streets and the realignment of 3/4 street improvements of Northeast Benjamin Road. Private street C and D will be constructed to provide access to lots 71 through 111. And phase 3, which will begin in 2026, will include the construction of the multifamily building and associated on-site improvements, including parking, landscaping, and utility connections. Now moving towards the final code piece, we look to the relevant PUD portion of the code, initially examining 15.240.020C, where you're looking at phasing requirements once again. Here, we are considering that the application has fully described the phasing sequence and can assure with sufficient detail that the project can be completed as described. The applicant acknowledges that this criterion will be met so long as they adhere to the timeline as described in this application, beginning in 2024 and ending in 2026. Now looking at the next section, 15.240020D, lapse of approval. The applicant acknowledges that they must stay in sequence with all submittal materials and the approved phasing of the project so that their PUD does not expire prior to execution. And lastly, we'll look at section 15.240.020P regarding the required landscaping. To be in compliance with this criterion, the applicant acknowledges that they shall complete the required landscaping as previously approved with PUD 22-0001 prior to certificate of occupancy or post-performance bond for completion of work as required by the director. And as far as public comments are concerned for this application, staff has received one comment subsequent to completion of the staff report, so it was included in the supplemental packet for your review. In conclusion, staff is recommending that the commission move to adopt Planning Commission Order 2023-0023, which approves the requested new conditional use permit CUP 23-0015 and minor modification MIMD 323-0002 of previously approved plan unit development PUD 22-0001.
Well, thank you. And now go ahead and open up the public testimony. I'd like to invite the applicant up. You have 15 minutes. So go ahead and state your name for the record and then go ahead from there.
Good evening. My name is Mercedes Sarah. I'm a planner with 3J Consulting here representing the applicant and the property owner at Crestview Green for the plan unit development. We'd like to thank the Planning Commission for their time tonight, and we'd like to thank staff for their report and presentation. The applicant, Westwood Homes, is proposing a new conditional use permit and a modification of the original PUD in order to adjust the phasing schedule for the project by 1 year. The proposed conditional use permit and modification will not have any alteration to the design of the original proposal, which was approved by the Planning Commission. Oh. Thank you. The original approved PUD is shown here on the map. As approved, the PUD and CUP will provide a mixture of single-family detached homes, attached single-family homes, and multifamily apartments. The development includes 14 single-family lots along the north property boundary, 95 single-family attached lots in the center of the site, and 24 multifamily homes down in the south portion of the site, for a total of 133 residential units. As staff stated, a conditional use permit is required because there is a commercial zoning on the southern portion of the site, and residential uses are allowed under a conditional use permit in the C2 zone. PUD will be constructed in 3 phases shown here. The first phase, shown in blue, will include lots 1 through 7, 16 through 71, extensions of Willackenzie Street and Jory Street to serve those lots, as well as the private street A and B, which will provide fire access turnaround as well. Frontage improvements to Highway 99 will be included as well, including bike lane, curb, sidewalk, and streetlights. And just a point of clarification, the first phase will include the stormwater facility, which is that area shown in blue on the far east side of the site, but it will not include the pump station, as these lots do not need to be served by the pump station. Phase 2 will include lots 8 through 14, 72 through 111. Right-of-way improvements will include further extensions of Willackenzie and Jory Street and the realignment of Benjamin Road to connect to those streets. Private streets C and D will also be provided to provide access to those lots. And then that pump station up in the northeast corner will be constructed in order to serve those lots. And then the final phase, beginning in 2026, would be the multifamily development in the south portion of the site shown in yellow, including all on-site improvements, parking, and landscaping. We'd like to thank you for your time tonight. As discussed, this is just really a situation where we need to adjust the development schedule by 1 year. Our review permits are currently in their second review for the city, so we anticipate that we would be able to construct the site within the timeline. It's really just a matter of not being able to get construction going in time for that summer construction this year. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it seems pretty cut and dried. Just need a little extra time. Anybody have any questions? Okay, thanks again. And I don't have anyone for in-person comments. Was there anyone on Zoom? Oh, I thought that Robert's for the other. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so hearing none, I'd like to go ahead and close the public testimony portion of the hearing and ask staff for final comments or recommendation.
Sure. As I mentioned before, staff is recommending that the commission move to adopt Planning Commission Order 2023-0023, which approves the requested new conditional use permit CUP 23-0015 and minor modification MIMD 323-0002 of previously approved plan unit development PUD 22-0001.
Thank you. So we'll go ahead to Planning Commission deliberation.
Planning Commissioner Wright, I have a question. On the letter submitted to the city, which says that no public notice was sent out. Is there a reason why this is not required a public notice?
They did send out a public notice. Yeah.
Did you? It was just stated, and I didn't see all the addresses that we normally see on the body.
Okay.
But I may not have gotten all the right pages either.
To the best of our knowledge and based on the applicant's submissions, the public noticing was conducted.
And then second is on our, this is actually maybe for Faye. On our cover agenda, attachment 5 is on there. On our agenda for this evening, but on the on this attachment 5 for the Planning Commission Order 2022-06, the 150 pages is not here. In the body of this paper, it talks about and appears in the appendixes referenced in this document, but I see no appendices, or is that referring to the previous first one?
So are you saying that where's the discrepancy between which agendas?
Just so we're clear, Faye is working with Commissioner Wright to determine what discrepancy she might be referring to. But one of the items that she seems to be referring to specifically is for this item on the commission's agenda. This particular item 5C, has 5 attachments associated with it. And what we're seeing is the published agenda opens the document the way it's supposed to, and she has noticed that the hard copy, which we haven't figured out where it's come from yet, doesn't seem to mention attachment 5. So they're working on that. But since it's off mic, and for anyone that's listening, as well as yourself, I wanted to just mention that out loud. And attachment 5 to the staff report is Planning Commission Order 2022-06, which would be the Planning Commission order that approved this project in 2022.
So I see the discrepancy. So on the notice that if you were to click on the staff report on that notice, it does not have a number 5, but it is there on the agenda as an attachment. But for some reason, the attachment, like, it's not written in and it wasn't added, but it is on the agenda. It is in there. It's in the published notice. It's just not on the cover page of the staff report. But it is in there. If you link to it, click on the link, it will go to
So
it.
it's absent from page 1 of the staff report.
Yes.
Reference to the.
Yes.
But to be clear, the attachment is
So, yeah,
referenced
it is-
in the narrative of the
it's
staff
distributed
report. It's just not included in the list on the cover page of the
So
staff.
like, go back.
Page 2.
So if you were to go
Oh,
and you saw it, if you just clicked on it, it would bring it up.
Yeah, it's just not included.
It's just not just included in the staff report, but it is there.
So when we approve it, do we say 1 through 5 attachments, or does that automatically go?
It would be the 5 attachments, because it'd be 5. It just got missed on the staff
Okay.
report. It is there though.
This should simply be, I would suggest that this is essentially a typo on the staff report.
Yeah, I just verbally did not say that too well. Thank you.
Okay, anything else from commissioners? Anyone have a motion?
Planning Commissioner Wright moves to approve conditional use permit 23-0015 and minor modification of plan unit MIMD 323-0002.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Get a vote, please.
Lainey Quinn,
Yes.
Jeff Musall,
Yes.
Chris Wright,
Yes.
Linda Newton Curtis,
Yes.
Mike Griffiths,
Yes.
Avery Hansen.
Yes.
The motion passes. Thank you very much. Okay, now we're gonna move back to the page over here. A quasi judicial public hearing with regard to CUP 23-0016 at 609 East Sheridan Street. And this time I'd like to ask for any objections or ex parte contact or objections, sorry. And hearing none, Oh, you have
sorry.
one? Go ahead.
No objection, but I do live within 500 feet of the proposed vacation home. But I won't let that affect my propensity in either direction to, you know.
Thank you. So Avery, if you will go ahead and read the language for this one.
ORS 197.797 requires certain statements be made at the commencement of a public hearing. The applicable city and state zoning criteria must be listed. This means that we must advise you of the standards that must be satisfied by the applicant prior to our approval or denial of an application. The planning staff will list the applicable criteria during his or her presentation of the staff report. Persons wishing to participate in this hearing must direct their testimony or the evidence towards the criteria stated by the planner or other specific city or state criteria which you believe apply. You must tell us why the testimony or evidence relates to the criteria. Any issue which might be raised in an appeal of this case to the Land Use Board of Appeals, LUBA, must be raised in person or by letter at the local level prior to the city approving or denying the application. The law states that the issue must be raised in enough detail to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond. This part of the law is known as the raise it or waive it requirement. If you do not bring it up now, you can't bring it up at LUBA. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval in enough detail to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Prior to the conclusion of the initial evidentiary hearing on an application, any participant might request an opportunity to present additional evidence or testimony regarding the application. The Planning Commission will grant such a request through a continuance or extension of the record.
Thank you. And let's go over to staff report.
Hello again, Commission. Tonight I will be presenting the case for a conditional use permit at 609 East Sheridan Street. Before I begin the rest of the presentation, I would also like to note that there was an error caught in the mailer referencing a wrong address in one part of the text. It has been corrected on the webpage prior to the hearing, and we have received one public comment on this vacation rental application subsequent to completion of the staff report. I entered the staff report for CUP 23-0016 into the record. The owner and applicant for this request is Christian Peterson. His request is to turn his 3-bedroom, single-family home on East Sheridan Street in Newberg into a short-term vacation rental. The zoning for this area is R2, medium-density residential, and the applicable code portion for review of his request can be found in sections 15.225.060 and 15.445.300 to 350 of the Newberg Municipal Code. This next slide is an aerial image of the residence showing its frontage onto East Sheridan Street and its adjacency to North School and North College Streets. Next are clips from the zoning map showing the home's context within the medium density zoning district R2. And likewise, its adjacency to industrial zoning to the west and the central business district C3 to the south. The utilities map shows that the house is also connected to the major water and sewer lines running along East Sheridan Street. Also shown stormwater flows to an adjacent curbside grate at the southeast corner of the block at the intersection of East Sheridan and North College Streets. Looking at the criteria under which to assess the request by the applicant, we find the code sections mentioned previously. Importantly, section 15.225.060A in regard to the character of the dwelling in relation to the rest of the neighborhood. A single-family dwelling is a 3-bedroom house with a single-car garage and a typical driveway for use by the potential short-term renters. These characteristics are in keeping with the immediate neighbors to the east, west, north, and south. Furthermore, it is noted that this neighborhood property is a short distance from the central business district of town, which would be convenient for vacation renters and would therefore meet the code requirements stated in section 15.225.060B. Lastly, the section states in criterion C that the proposed use is consistent with this code. This includes Newberg Municipal Code, chapters 15.445, Article 7, which we will look at next. The highlights for this section of the code are as follows. One, that the vacation rental must be a single-family dwelling, which the house at 609 East Sheridan Street is. The dwelling must be registered with the city and the owner pay a transient lodging tax. And the owner has indicated that he will register with the city and pay the required tax. The owner must maintain standards. He is providing 2 off-street parking spaces, 1 in the driveway and 1 in the garage. Occupancy for 6 guests, and that's no more than 2 persons for each bedroom. Waste collection on each Monday of the week, and will prohibit RVs and any other temporary shelters on the premises. And lastly, regarding posting, the owner acknowledges his responsibility to post contact information for himself and the police, vacation rental standards, maximum occupancy, and Monday as the garbage pickup day. And again, in conclusion, staff is recommending that the commission move to adopt Planning Commission Order 2023-24 with conditions, approving conditional use permit CUP 23-0016 for a vacation rental home at 609 East Sheridan Street, Yamhill County Tax Lot R3218DD 15400.
Thank you. So we'll move on to public testimony. Faye, is the applicant in Zoom?
Yes, they are.
Okay, if you'd like to come on board and state your name for the record and then give us your presentation.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, my name is Christian Peterson. Yeah, so it kind of feels like I'm next to the gallows here, based on the previous short-term rental being tabled, so I'm assuming it'll be a similar outcome here. But I wanted to just go through and see if I meet current criteria with my application. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions from commissioners?
Is that typo on page 20 by any chance for the date for the citing of which CUP it was?
There very well could have been a typo. I'm not sure which one you're referring to.
Okay, I'm just gonna read this, page 20, 41. 5th line down is CUP 22. Should that be 23-0017 to 16? This is referencing 0017. And shouldn't it be referencing 10016 or 0016?
Yes.
Page 20.
The current application is CUP 23-0016.
Okay, and that is a typo.
Okay.
So page 20, 5th line down,
Okay.
need to be changed. The CUP 22-0017 needs to be changed to CUP 23-0016. And then on the 15th line, same page, CUP 22-0017 vacation rental 411 North School Street should read CUP 23-0016 to vacation rental 609 East Sheridan Street. Is the applicant still online?
I am.
Yes.
Can we still ask him? We still ask him. We can.
Do you have a question?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
On your application on page 5 of 41, attachment 1.
Okay.
Attachment 1, page 5 of 41. you state only 2 cars will be in the park, will be allowed at the property. How do you propose to enforce that?
I live down the road. I can do frequent drive-bys. I will state it when they book. They'll automatically get an email. It'll state the rules for staying at the property, and that will be stated.
Right, thank you. Another thing I'm gonna offer you at another meeting, we have free city parking lots. So if you ever have more than 2 cars, if they have somebody coming to visit, that might be an option too. And then to leave a car at a free city parking lot. Can you even do that? Is there overnight parking here?
The on-street parking is available to the public. It is not privately owned, and they're only required to have a minimum of 2 off-street parking spaces based on our criteria.
Yeah, I was just wondering. All right, thank you.
Okay, so at this time, we'd like to move on in public testimony and ask Robert come up, state your name for the record and go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Robert Suppy, and I happen to be a neighbor of this property. I'm not here tonight to speak for or against this specific vacation rental, but would like to make a few comments about it, as well as the long-range view of vacation rentals. Regarding this application, I note that unlike a previous approval for a nearby vacation rental, it actually does have 2 off-street parking spaces as required. That's very good. One of these parking spaces, though, is inside a garage whose door has typically been closed. I trust that the property owner will ensure that the use of the garage for parking is made convenient enough that it will actually be used by the occupants. I will remind the commission that the property is on a block where parking is allowed on only one side, is around the corner from another block with parking on only one side, and is a half block away from a large facility that was recently given a 60% reduction in its parking requirements. Parking availability is often an issue in the immediate area around this property. The findings restrict the use of this property to a maximum of 6 occupants. I was unable to find a definition for occupant in the Newberg Municipal Code. Does this commission interpret this restriction to say that no more than 6 people may be in the home at any one time, or does it refer simply to overnight stays? I can say from personal observations that the occupant restriction in some other vacation rentals is often exceeded if the first interpretation is the accepted one. If that occupancy is exceeded, is this something that would be enforceable by the police department? Lastly, I have a simple recommended change to item 3 in Exhibit B regarding refuse collection. I suggest leaving out the words every Monday to allow flexibility if Waste Management chooses to change its pickup schedule for this location. It's not a big deal, but didn't seem to be necessary. Since I've not used up my 5 minutes, I'd like to make some comments, some overall comments about vacation rentals. First of all, I greatly appreciate the Commission's previous request to the City Council for some sort of policy of how the city wishes to move forward with vacation rentals. I recognize that without any code changes, you have no ability within the code to deny any vacation rentals that meet the existing criteria. If you look at the neighborhood, it includes the 4 blocks made up from this property to 1 block east and 1 block south. You'll find a significant number of vacation rentals. On this side, on the side of the street, on this particular property, when this application is approved, 3 of the 5 properties will be vacation rentals. Earlier on the application, there was a comment about 3 applications within 500 feet. When this is approved, there will be at least 5 vacation rentals within 300 feet. I'm sorry. I had to jump around a bit. Anyway, I guess that was it. I hope that this commission has some real input to future changes to code to see what we do and don't want in the way of vacation rentals. Thank you.
Thank you. And for clarification, Clay, like the 6-person limit, would be for overnight stays, correct?
My interpretation would be that it would be for overnight stays, but limitations on how many people can be in the house would be regulated by things like safety and nuisance and some of the other items that we have for municipal code. But to the point that Mr. Suppi is making, we don't define which of those 2 tracks it is. And my understanding is that that is limited to the overnight stays. So I wouldn't have anything to tie it to for enforcement purposes to just have humans in the building.
Okay.
That would be my take without looking at it closer. But
Thank you.
if a complaint was brought to the planning commit to us that someone had exceeded the occupant and was in violation, we would be forced to look at it more closely and make that sort of interpretation, but it's just never come up. Thank you.
Thank you. So at this time, I'd like to offer the applicant a rebuttal, if you'd like, sir.
No, 6 people overnight was my intent. That's what I plan on enforcing. I think that covers it on my end. Thanks.
Well, thank you. Okay, then I'll go ahead and close the public testimony portion of the hearing and ask for final comments and recommendation from staff.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Wright. I believe the second typo that you're referring to was that text error in the mailer. So that was what we corrected on the site, and the other one will be remedied shortly. Yes, again, staff is recommending that the commission move to adopt Planning Commission Order 2023-24 with conditions, approving conditional use permit CUP 23-0016 for a vacation rental home at 609 East Sheridan Street, Yamhill County Tax Lot R3218 DD 15400.
Thank you, and we'll move on to Planning Commission deliberation.
This is Commissioner Newton Curtis. And I would just like to make the statement, if there are 5 residences on that block, 3 of which will become vacation homes, 2 of which already are vacation homes, we're talking about a block in which 60% of the houses on that block are vacation homes or will be vacation homes. To put it very bluntly, I think this is wrong. This particular person who sent in the letter, this is the 4th time she's written. Again, I live close to this area and I'm not allowing that to bias. I really am going on principle here. I think it's wrong to have any block in any city in which 60% of the houses on that block are vacation homes. And if we as a group believe that that does not impact livability, I really don't know what does.
Is it the whole block or just that street?
Can you define the difference?
Sure. If you have one side of a block and 5 houses on that and 3 of them are taken up with short-term rentals, then you've a whole block statement is you've got the other 3 corners of a traditional block that also have houses on them. So it's not necessarily 60% of the whole block, just that one street frontage.
So it doesn't matter that it's 60% of the road on which people live. Is that the interpretation that I should take?
Just not the interpretation. You stated 60% of the block. And I want to make sure you clarify that, or clarify that it's not the whole block. It's just the frontage road.
And then it's just the frontage road.
That we're
Having,
talking.
yeah, having said that, and I don't even know if I'm allowed to do this, but I did look at this person's house and I looked at the full full blocks around her house. And I noticed that there were 37 houses or residencies in those four square blocks. And of those, I believe 11, if this one is to pass, will be vacation homes. So if we do some quick math, what's that percentage? So almost a third of the houses in that area. Again, just for the record, I think that impacts everybody's livability, and I believe that's wrong. And I don't think it matters whether it's Newberg or Timbuktu. I think it's wrong.
Currently at this time, Commissioner Wright, we don't have any codes that don't say we can. There's nothing saying that they can't be next to each other. And my concern is that if we don't approve some of these things and they meet the criteria, that we are opening up the city to a lawsuit. And that would be yes, Clay?
So if I could jump in, and I don't disagree that you should not be arbitrarily or capriciously denying things. However, the two yourselves, Commissioners Newton Curtis and Commissioner Wright, you just had a conversation about the appropriateness of the extent to which that is and whether or not that could be interpreted as excessive. Now, livability was brought up again. I assume that that is in reference to one of our conditional use permit criteria. If you feel so, I'll kind of paraphrase into how we sometimes think about when we're making findings. If we make findings, we often use the language in the code criteria to create the finding, and it is kind of a because statement. And so the observation might be that there is an excessive number of something occurring because this excessive whatever it is occurring, it has an impact or does not allow the proposed project to meet the criteria, whatever that is, and that could be livability in this circumstance. So you do have the ability to do something, and I think that Director Rux, when he was here, had encouraged you previously that if you're going to deny something or propose denying something, or even if you're going to condition it, that you should try and make a finding. It needs to be proportional to the impact. We need to think about what is it doing, and if that impact is not appropriate, can we condition it before we outright deny something? If it is something that can't be mitigated, then and not until then, do you consider not approving something because you're potentially taking away someone's private property rights, which is not what your goal is here, obviously. So you do have the ability to choose to approve or deny things. There are better and worse ways to do that. Doing it without making something resembling a finding could be construed as being arbitrary or capricious, which is not what we're trying to do. We're supposed to be consistent. We're supposed to use our criteria to do it. But if you can tie it back to those criteria, again, much like the comments made earlier tonight by Mr. Suppy, then that's what the findings are. There's no magic in what staff does in making findings for these staff reports. Frankly, it's kind of like making sausage. We're doing the same thing over again, and we eventually end up with a staff report because we do it to every single criteria. That's why those staff reports are so long. And so if you do want to do that, I really encourage you to think about what you're having qualms with in your deliberation and see if there's a way to remedy it based on what the criteria is asking occur. And if you choose to not support something, I would strongly recommend on behalf of the city that you make a finding, essentially a because statement. Something is happening. Because this is happening, this thing over here is not being met. And so that would be it. So, and you don't have to do that. You are your own body, but it will have far less vulnerability from the city's perspective if you do it in that way.
So if I were to say, because 30% of the residencies in the 4 blocks around this person's house are vacation rentals or proposed vacation rentals, which is impacting livability? Would that hold any substance?
It could. It could. So, and this is, again, it's all interpretive. The applicant may contest that we don't have standards to say that they can't be that. But again, it's a conditional use permit. You're trying to think about, are there impacts? These could be hard things coming to you. And this one specifically, the public comment that was received was related to there being short-term rentals in close proximity in the area. And so that is something, can that be remedied or not? And I mean, it would be a hard one to remedy. And is it acceptable? Does it meet these criteria that exist? So the way that I often structure these is there would be an observation. So your observation is that there are approximately X number of vacation rentals. Because these homes are unoccupied for periods of time or do other damage that affects livability, then, and so I would, typically I'm used to writing these down, not just stating them in this way. So usually there's actually more direct language directly out of the criteria. So if you would want to workshop your language in some way, but really tie it back to what you're trying, what the problem is and whether or not something can be fixed, and then state the criteria is met or the criteria is not met, using that because of this or that as your bridge to whether the criteria is met. It's hard if you start out thinking it's just not met, here's why, but include what's occurring, because this is occurring, the criteria is or is not being met. I don't know if that is the most tight and tidy version of telling you how some of the findings are made, but really I would make sure that if you are considering something that is shaped like a denial or even an exaction, something we're demanding that an applicant do that is over and above what others have to do, that it really think about what we're doing, because we haven't denied other projects that have made a similar application, but they've been at different properties. They may have had different impacts and those sorts of things. And that's why it's important. So it's not an easy ask that you all are given. And it's harder every single time one of these comes through, because you're seeing that trend of these coming through consistently. From a staff perspective, when we evaluated this, we're not asked, and we don't have criteria for density-based standards. But staff, when you bring up livability, which is undefined, again, hard, it's hard. So I would leave you to your deliberation as you choose to. But if you want it to be defensible, then you really need to tie it to something.
I think the code itself does not help us. 15.225.060 subparagraph A, the location, size, design, and operating characteristics of the proposed development. I don't know how an individual house applying for a vacation rental would fall under the definition of a development, at least as I understand it. And I have no problem citing specific, it's not just livability. It says it must be made reasonably compatible with and have minimal impact on the livability. So I would cite 15.225.060 subparagraph A. But nobody's made a motion, so.
Planning Commissioner Wright, to approve CUP 23-0016 for a vacation rental at 609 East Sheridan Street, Newberg, Oregon.
Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, before we vote, just one point of order to make sure that we don't get in trouble down the line. With Commissioner Newton Curtis stating that she'd driven by, does that constitute ex parte contact?
That's probably something that should have been disclosed at the beginning of the hearing, but I don't think that that would typically be ex parte contact. It's now been disclosed. Do you feel that has biased your opinion in any way?
No, because this is the same situation, the same argument that I've been making regardless of where these houses are, when people are protesting about houses in the area and when there's multiple people. And you mentioned that not only do I drive by, but I walk by there on a constant basis when I'm walking my dogs.
Understood. I assume, you know, it's not something that would get looked back upon and said that, no.
No, but I thank you for that.
Okay, we have a second and a motion and a second. Can we get a vote?
Laney Quinn,
Yes.
Jeff Musall,
Yes.
Chris Wright,
Yes.
Mike Griffiths,
No, but I would be willing to table this to, with the other application to the January meeting. But for now, no.
Linda Newton Curtis,
No.
Avery Hansen.
Yes.
Okay, and the motion passes. Okay, and moving on, the next item is a more fun one. A resolution of appreciation for public service provided by Doug Rux to the city of Newberg. And go ahead, staff report.
Give me one moment to get all my things in order here. I see we're losing our last member of the public that's here in person, so I just wanted to say thank you for sticking around.
Thank you very much.
Done. Merry Christmas.
Indeed.
Appreciate it.
So with this item, this was a request from your chair that we conduct a resolution of appreciation. As you know, Director Rux retired on November 1st. I will tell you, we have been quite busy since he left. He does just a lot of very valuable work and rode off into the sunset with a lot of knowledge. And so this was created, the staff report is just that. It kind of talks about the things that Doug Rux did for the city over his tenure, to the extent that the staff member that wrote this, which would be me, knew about them, which is limited and finite because I haven't been here that long even, and the rest of our team's been here even less time, which is terrifying. If should you like us to, we're happy to read it out loud so that it kind of gets recorded into things. The resolution it's intended as a resolution of appreciation, just recognizing him. Alternatively, you can ask us to read it. You can kind of do a read by title, and we'll just do it by title, and then you can decide if you would like to vote on it. But that's it as far as staff just telling you what we have and why we have it.
Title sounds fun. Yeah.
What's that?
Title sounds fun. Like just a little bit. I love that we have to vote on it. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in really quickly and say that, you know, I predate you guys, so I'm probably the longest one here that worked with Doug, and yeah, and I just think it's good to acknowledge important contributions, and he did make important contributions to the city, so that was my 2 cents on it.
I would concur. Planning Commissioner Chris Wright. I so enjoyed Doug. We really relied on him for those moments of and we all looked at him. I really am gonna miss Doug. And I'm looking forward to meeting whoever you guys, whoever the city ends up hiring for that position. And I wish Mr. Rux a very good time in his retirement. And I really thank you for your service to the city, Doug. Thank you.
And that reminds me, I did skip one thing. So we did let Doug know that this was on the agenda. So he said that he wasn't going to make it for the meeting, but he did express his appreciation that it being recognized. So I wanted to let you know. Is that about right? Faye, did I miss anything? Okay.
Planning Commissioner Wright, I motion to approve GEN 23-0010 A planning commission resolution. Appreciation for public service provided by Doug Rux to the city of Newberg and its residents.
I can second that.
All right, a motion and a second, a vote, please.
Jeff Musall,
A resounding yes.
Chris Wright,
Capital YES.
Lainey Quinn,
Absolutely.
Mike Griffiths,
Definitely.
Linda Newton Curtis,
Absolutely. Did somebody
Avery
say it
Hansen.
already?
Yes.
And it passes unanimously. Congratulations and good luck on what's going forward in life, Doug.
Yay.
Next, items from staff.
All right, so this was intended as a general update, both kind of looking at things that had happened recently and just kind of bringing you up to speed with a few of the things going on with the city. So I'll go through the things that I highlighted in the memo that was in the agenda. So obviously the retirement of Doug Rux. So we're well aware of that just happened. So thank you for acknowledging him and appreciating his work. Short-term rental update and short-term rental ad hoc committee. So your recommendation is still part of what will be considered by city council. The city council received an update from staff in November, and that update was the white paper, your recommendation, and we mentioned the statement from the police department, but I think that I accidentally overlooked including it in their agenda. And so we ended up having some discussion of it, but this police statement was made available to us shortly before that time. And then it's been made available during our short-term rental ad hoc committee meetings as well. So at that time, they chose not to take any particular action on things except to say, we'd like to let the committee do its thing, come to us too. And so when staff goes back to city council, it'll be once the short-term rental ad hoc committee has a chance to make their recommendation, and then it'll be your planning commission's recommendation alongside their recommendation, as well as the white paper, as well as the statement from the police department, because those all seem to be relevant pieces of the discussion thus far. And so that's the plan. My expectation based on what I've seen in those short-term rental ad hoc committee meetings are public. The public can go to those. I've been this started months ago, putting together a small interested parties list for anyone who would like to receive email updates about things related to, it was intended as just the research, but now it's kind of spun out to this rental ad hoc committee since that's generally what they're talking about. But that interested parties list is relatively small. If anyone on your commission would like to receive those email notifications, please tell me. I'd be happy to add you. I'll write those down, but
I'd like to receive those, please.
I'm trying to think of a way that I don't lose those. So Commissioner Quinn, you're the only one that's not here in person. Did you say that you did or did not want to be on the notification list?
I would like to be on the notification list, please.
Okay. Could everyone who's here in person please raise your hand if you'd like me to add you to the notification list? Okay. All right. So I'll go ahead and add those to those, and if for some reason it comes up again with your fellow commissioners, I'm happy to add they or anyone else that you speak with in the community that this is an important issue to them. We're happy to do that. The interested parties list has been small, but it doesn't need to keep being that way. It's just one of those that we would like to keep people informed, as we would with any project where people ask to be kept informed. So that'll be going forward. The next ad hoc committee is not till January. I think we said January 17th. So, we'll see if that ends up being their last meeting. They're basically at this point trying to wrap up their recommendation, similar to the deliberation that you all had here. They're trying to put a bow on it, as it were, and figure out what that should be and how much is too much detail and what stuff they need to dive into now, what stuff they might ask staff to dive into later. My general take would be, it seems like they're going to recommend that the city council give an assignment to staff, and they're going to have some boundaries on it that they're going to suggest, much like you did. And that's why I think it's important. And if we do get a work assignment, that the item 1 amongst your 5-point recommendation was a joint work session with city council. So that's why I want to make sure those sorts of things stay on the radar, because that could really shape how that work effort looks in the future. So I appreciate the recommendation that you've had, that you've continued to work on these items and that it's still being considered. So,
Is it possible, it concerns me that there seems to be little interest. I think that that's a communication thing, not saying we didn't try. Will often writes, I've seen some editorials or an appearance at the Newberg, what is it, the club, Newberg City Club or something. I would think that this would be a good topic for him to get out there and just let people know that it's being discussed. So that's one more way to communicate to the community that, hey, this is being looked at. A lot of people have had some strong opinions about it. Now's the time to speak.
So from a staff side of things, we don't have a project yet. This is all stuff that's just us doing extra things that isn't really even us having been asked to do anything specific. So from a staff side, we're trying not to overstep and still get to city council so we can determine if they do want us to do something. So we're, as far as I'm concerned, from a staff side, we're still in the pre-project phase. So interested parties list being small, could it be bigger? Sure, because especially I have tried to mention it to people who have come in here and made public comments during a number of these items over time. Have we gone back and emailed every single commenter who has sent us something since that time? No, but if we put a project together and it came on the books, I would consider doing something like that because those people have expressed interest. I would consider doing an editorial or asking the city manager to do one, absolutely. And I might offer to say, hey, city club, do you have a full slate yet? Or would you like to have us come talk about this? Those sorts of things are fine recommendations for public outreach. And if staff does get direction from city council to do work, because this is something where people have strong opinions on either for or against, we'll be recommending that public outreach be part of the scope of work associated with the project. So if the city council says, no, just do what we told you, that's one scope of work. If they say, yes, go talk to the community, get the public input, do those things. So it's one of those things that it seems like it would be certainly a best practice to go speak to the community about this because there are diverse opinions, both for and against, and different ways to shape it. And because there's so many approaches to it throughout the state and beyond. So I don't disagree at all, but I'm not concerned yet because I think we haven't really got into the work itself. I'll tell Will. You can tell him whatever you would like. I'll send him the recording. So are there any other questions on
A
short-term
song
rentals?
just came to mind. Blame it on the, no. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay.
I did want to say, staff updates for planning commission, that memorandum that you put out. On that first page, commissioners, at the very bottom, there's a paragraph. Planning division staff facilitated meeting short-term rental ad hoc committee on these dates. Each of these meetings open to the public and agenda packets available online at newbergoregon.gov meetings. I went in that and it took me 3 literal hours to put all these together. So you ready? Okay, here we go. Alright, where's my list? Okay, the first meeting for September 28th. Let me see this. Okay, the September 28th, 2023 meeting is not posted in the meeting area, but it occurred. I found the meeting agenda on the October 5th meeting. And then the short-term rental for October 3rd. Okay, I found that in there. And then November 13th, no meeting minutes approved because they haven't, 1-page agenda. Shows November 30th meeting is canceled. Then it goes to, okay. When you guys put meeting canceled like this, that is awesome for the public. Just to go boom, done.
Commissioner, can I jump in? Is there anything that you would like me to send to you? That you weren't, I apologize that it took so long to find the information you were looking for, but is there
No,
more that you're
I'm
looking
gonna
for?
point out to the other commissioners, you did have the information here that this was going have the availability to look this up, but within these ad hoc committees, I guess I should get to the meat of it. A lot of the counselors have come up with some recommendations and they're already kind of mimicking what has been brought up before. So it'd be great if the rest of the commissioners can read through those ad hoc committees. And everything before our next meeting. And you can see what they're doing, and it's great because all of your thoughts are actually being done during that meeting.
May
And
I-
It's wonderful.
May I see if I'm kind of getting your drift on this? Would you like me to ask one of our staff to send the materials from that the short-term rental ad hoc committee has received and generated so far to the commissioners? To the planning commissioners?
Oh, I've already wrote it. I've already got mine
Well,
down, but
I know you
um,
do, but are you asking us to do that for the rest of your fellow commissioners?
yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
We
Mr.
would be
Chair.
happy to. Thank you. So some of the other items that were on the memo for the update, we got direction earlier this month to initiate a sequential urban growth boundary amendment. So that would be a long-range planning project. This is just the very first piece of a relatively large project that could go on for an extensive period of time. I don't know how much of that will come to this commission at different steps versus NUMAC is another committee that does urban growth boundary amendments. I believe that if we take it all the way to the urban growth boundary amendment, much like the urban reserve proposal came to the planning commission, kind of happened at that phase. So it would go in different places at different times. And I don't know exactly what that scope of work would reasonably be expected to look like at this time. We don't have anything that looks like a scope of work. So I don't know how many times it would come to you, when it would come in the phases, what the phases would look like. But if that goes forward and as it progresses, it could come to you in the future, but it is a relatively long process potentially. So that was direction from City Council. Then we also had something that I thought may be of interest to your commission, which was the emergency ordinance that was associated with DCI and the fire that they had in 2022. So that's something where an emergency ordinance was adopted, putting a restriction on land use regulations based on that fire so they could occupy a different building where that use wouldn't typically be allowed. So that was done as an emergency ordinance. So I believe it went straight to the city council for that one. But just because you guys do land use, I thought that might be of interest. And so the city, DCI has asked for an extension on that one. Based on their business, it's better for them to have a long runway as opposed to get close to their expiration date because there's so many jobs and other contingencies that are there for them. So they've made that request to city council. And then we're also looking at a number of items associated with customer service and public improvement or process improvement and customer service. That's related to some conversations that have actually been going on for a number of months, basically since I got here, and are somewhat related to the city council's goals that they have. So they have some general customer service oriented goals. And so the department will be doing some of that. And part of why I mentioned this to you is we may be reaching out to your commission to ask for your participation in some kind of a work session or open house, depending on what we decide to form it like. As consumers of our staff reports and as consumers of our work, your input could be really valuable on asking, are we doing things the right way? Could we call what we generate readily available to the public, or could we shape things in ways where it could be more easily understood by the public? And so I don't know the answer to those things exactly, but we may ask one or two city councilors to be involved in that sort of a conversation. We may ask external stakeholders or applicants that have dealt with us in the past. So we don't know exactly what that would be, but because you deal with planning things so often, that ask may come sometime in the next few months, or as soon as the next couple of months. And that's it for me as far as updates on that memo, although I would mention that that memo had included an attachment that was the statement from the Newberg Dundee Police Department. It also included one of those customer service items that we're working on. We're having a student group from California Lutheran University is doing a study related to enhancing local government service delivery and promoting good governance as a capstone project by a pair of graduate students that are doing their studies there. One of our staff went to their public policy and administration program. And so their faculty reached out and asked if we'd be interested in having a capstone project study some of the work that we do. And so specifically, this research study was being done because of our city council goals. So we kind of shared those city council goals, went through a few different ideas, and this is one that they thought would be interesting on saying, what does good service delivery look like from local governments? And what expectations should we set? What's reasonable? That is it for that particular item. The other item from staff is just the anticipated schedule of planning commission activities. And so we went through as, I'll keep similar to how Doug has in the past. I will continue doing these so that you can see what's slated coming up in the future in the next few months. So that's about it. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Has anybody, I read something, this is a while ago and I know we talked about it, but I don't remember what the answer was. Has anybody taken on the project of looking for short-term rentals that are advertised in Newberg that are not? There's actually software that's available to the city, a module that does that automatically for you. So if somebody advertises and they're not showing up as a, authorized or whatever.
It's come up, in particular, it's come up in our short-term rental ad hoc committees, and I will tell you that group is very interested in compliance rates.
Oh.
Because as you recall, if you may or may not recall from the white paper, that we had basically 3 streams of information, which were permits, business licenses, and TLT remittances, or transient lodging tax remittances. But we didn't know is if someone was not doing any one of those 3 things, we have no idea. Because there was just too much. If we try and as an external user just go do kind of a windshield test for Airbnb and VRBO and those sorts of things, it's really hard for us to tell which ones we're looking at, whether they're listed at the particular time frame we're looking at, the particular window. So there were some limitations on what we felt would be reliable in putting in there. We're aware that the data and technology is in there. We didn't mention it extensively, but it is mentioned in there. And this group with wanting higher compliance rates, which, I mean, you could look at that even selfishly and say, well, you don't want too much lost revenue just sitting out there not being capitalized on by the city, because those activities are happening and everyone needs to play by the same rules. So that's really where they seem to be coming from, is they want people playing by those same rules. So I think that overall, I would expect that city council may be supportive of us looking at some kind of enhanced options for ensuring high levels of compliance. And that will probably go pretty quickly into technology to do that or help us with that. But we don't know exactly what that would be. And we haven't budgeted for anything like that yet. So what I would expect is if we get that direction in this winter-ish period, that's something we plan for through our budgeting process. And then we can start looking and scoping at that time.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
How much revenue are we bringing in through the, what is it called? The transient lodging tax? I mean, do you have a sense of what last year's revenue was, for example?
I could look it up. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I will look at James and see if he remembers.
And is
Yeah.
it separated out though by?
Depending on the reports that you look at, because they do have some summary reports, we can see. I think we can see all. Yes, we can. I just don't remember if we had that in the white paper or not. James is preparing to send me something, but so do we have the ability to do that? Yes, because we can break it out by the institution that's submitting those remittances. So the city knows. I do not know sitting here, and I don't know that it is in the adopted budgets. I don't think that is broken out that way at the TLT. It just says what revenues we got. So I'm happy to look those up or share those. Although I will say that transient lodging taxes are something that's part of the city's revenue portfolio of revenue every year. And from my understanding, it has gone up and continue to go up, which is what we've seen with transient lodging taxes too.
Commissioner Wright, when I looked, when I did actually my first CUP, I think in 2019, I saw over 277 listings here in Newberg off of one site. And we've also had public testimony that this also allows people to sidestep tenant and landlord issues. And something that definitely lost of revenue, tenant landlord issues being sidestepped potentially, I think are all factors. And thank you guys for doing all that. Appreciate you.
We may have some information coming through.
With the AI a little bit. We have the full version.
So I'll just finish with items from staff with James has brought this over to me. It looks like the figure that we had that went into the studies that we did was approximately the transient lodging taxes included $947,256.08 approximately, and that was overall. But then
For last year. I'm sorry, was that for
this
last year?
this was for the period of July 1st, 2021 to June 30th, 2022. And the portion that appears to be vacation rentals is, I'm stalling because it's, here we go. And obviously this is a rough estimate because I'm doing it on the fly at a hearing, but the estimate that I have is approximately, oh, dang, I missed something. I'm gonna add one more.
Thank you for doing it on the fly during a hearing.
Is approximately $96,526. So roughly 10% of the overall transient lodging taxes is what we would glean from that. If we're asked to look into this further in the future, that might be something we start differentiating between those if that's a desired thing for direction we get in the future. And that's all I have for items from staff.
All right, my bad. This is a follow up. I had to have another Zoom. I'm supposed to be on here shortly. But yeah, if there's nothing from commissioners, anything else?
I have one thing that's
Go ahead.
kind of more lighthearted. I'm wondering if we could talk, or who is in charge of the Christmas lights in Newberg. It just seems that it just seems like we're the poor cousins. When you look at Sherwood or when you look at McMinnville, they've got these really glitzy lights. And when you drive through Newberg, and maybe I should be calling them holiday lights rather than Christmas lights, but whatever we want to call them, when we drive through Newberg, half of the bulbs are blown out, so they're not even lit. And I think, gosh, could we do something at least for next year?
Well, my daughter is very impressed by what she considers double wreaths. She thinks they're very pretty.
Isn't CPRD that handles a lot
So
of lights?
it depends on what areas you're talking about, because
Yeah.
just like any neighborhood you drive to,
Yeah.
it depends who lives there. But for street lights and those sorts of things that we find in certain areas of town or decorations, some of that would be the Public Works Department. So like when you, for example, when you see banners on the street lights along First Street and those sorts of areas, Public Works Operations Division is doing those sorts of things. So there's some decorations. I would say the outside of City Hall, I think it looks nice personally, but if you find anything that you have a grievance with or you think could just be that much better, then contact Public Works, or and I don't think it would hurt Public Works' feelings a whole lot if you just had some constructive input. You could also reach out to your city councilors and say, hey, I really think that our city could be doing this or that. And then we'll see what happens with it, because that's kind of how input works. But the actions happen from Public Works Department if it's a city item, and it's I think Jeff, you just mentioned that it is CPRD if it's one of our parks or something like that. That would be a little bit different. And if I will also say that I think that some of our staff have City Hall on the main floor when you come in, looking very festive. So if you think outside doesn't look good enough, I would encourage you stop in, say hello, particularly to Faye, and I think they've made it look pretty inviting in there. So that's really, I don't know. I'm happy with how at least some pieces are looking. But
Well done, Faye, by the way.
And may I just say, Faye, I think you look very festive this evening also.
Well,
Very much.
thank
Missed
you.
in the Zoom until you stood up during the recess. Very well done.
Oh, thank you. I do have a little bit of insight on our decorations for the streets because I was talking to Preston, who is our public works superintendent. And I guess the ones that are hanging up on the lights are very old and nostalgic, and they've been around for a long time, and they've actually been trying to replace the bulbs with LEDs so they can stay, but they're kind of keeping them around for nostalgia reasons. So like Clay said, something to bring up to the city council. And if you notice when they brought it to put them up, it was the police department or not police, but the fire department and public works. I guess the fire department has a bit of it say in it too, so.
I wonder if maybe we should put a notice up somewhere saying we're using these because of nostalgia, just so that people know.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Right? The CPRD, I remember, was the Chehalem Cultural Center was theirs. So yeah, so it makes sense that the streets would be public works though. But anything else from anyone? Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Festive Festivus, whatever you celebrate. All right, and good night. All right, adjourn the heck's the date, December 14th. Meeting of the Newberg Planning Commission.